Welcome to this next panel session. I'm delighted to be hosting over the next hour or so. So my name's James Baker. I'm the CEO of Graphene at Manchester. Again, some of you are probably aware, Graphene, first isolated in Manchester 2004, sticky tape and graphite to isolate a single atomic layer of carbon, now looking to develop a whole range of products and applications. But I'm delighted to be chairing the panel here today with four fantastic speakers. A range of speakers are going to ask them to introduce themselves in a moment. So the subject of today is, for me, it's at the heart of many been affected over the last few years. The last show I actually went to was 2019, the Advanced Materials Show in Telford. And it's quite interesting to be back here again today in a real show. We've done a couple of events, a couple of outings, but we've all learnt to live in this new hybrid world where we don't go out and about continuously. We don't go to lots of conferences. We talk to different people. So there's a real question for me around the impact of the last 2 years in terms of innovation, the pace of innovation, how we work as a community, to address some of the challenges that are taking place in our various sectors and markets. I add into that some of the challenges, for example, the war in Ukraine that probably is affecting material supply chain, clearly affecting some sectors more than others. And there's been quite a lot of impact and quite a lot of change over the last 2 years. So I think the purpose of this panel is really to get some discussion going around what's the impact of that change, the pandemic, war in Ukraine, in terms of innovation. And what might we be doing differently, or should we be doing to really increase that pace of innovation? From my background, graphene is 18 years young. It's a new material. Carbon fiber, as an example, probably took 25 years from first discovery through to products in the marketplace. But already on 2D materials, we're seeing everything from shoes to coatings to batteries to plants growth through to space satellites, if anyone's interested in the graphene journey. So I'm seeing a real increase in pace, but we're having to operate differently. So I'm looking forward now to get some views on the panel. So looking for questions from the audience. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, please start preparing those questions. But first of all, I'd like the panel just to briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then open that up to the panel. So Laura, maybe first, a brief introduction.
Yeah, thanks, James. So I'm Laura Baker. I work for Tata Steel. Been there for 20-something years. I look older than I am. No, that's the wrong way.
I'm going to take the fifth.
Yeah, I'd probably better. So I'm really excited to be here, and we've already had some great conversations, so I'm sure we're going to carry that on today. I think from a Tata Steel point of view, I'm head of product development and product management. So clearly, innovation is key to what we do. And we've seen some challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, not least the sort of fragility of supply chains and raw materials as we've come out of COVID and then into the Ukraine war. So I think we've got lots of topics to talk about, and I'm looking forward to an exciting hour.
Hi, I'm Steve Harris. I'm Head of External Partnerships at BAE Systems. In a previous life, I was a materials scientist in a lab, working for James, in fact. In the olden days, I've been with BAE Systems 34 years. My day job these days is managing our university partners, which is we've got 6 of, one of which is Manchester, which is fortuitous. And surprisingly enough, whenever I go there, I'm always keen to get into a materials lab.
Thanks, Steve. Tony Kinsella, I'm the Chief Executive of Cerion, a materials consultancy, formerly RTO, around ceramics and traditional ceramics. Now our key area is advanced ceramic materials, so helping our clients develop new materials and new processes to bring those materials into manufacturing.
And I'm Landon Mertz. I'm the CEO of Cerion Nanomaterials. We're one of the largest in the United States for designing, scaling, and manufacturing nanoparticles, specifically metal, metal oxide, and ceramics. We just crossed our 15th year anniversary, which in our industry is no small feat. And what we do is we don't develop products to solve industrial challenges. What we do is we provide access to product development teams, commercialization teams that are looking to leverage nano into their products. And we take them cradle to grave, usually supporting them at applied research all the way through to manufacturing. So pleasure to be with you all.
So thank you to the panel. So we've got a real international panel. Looking forward to this session. So let me just kick things off with the first question to the panel. So this is really around the impact on materials. So question to the panel, where do you see the greatest need for materials innovation after the pandemic and the situation in Ukraine? How's that changed? And will these changes be permanent? Laura, maybe.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I think, clearly there's some key challenges. I mean, if you look at steel, which is traditionally known as a commodity product, but I can tell you is anything but, the availability of skills in terms of people who can develop materials going forward is going to be a key challenge for us, and that's only been made worse by COVID and changes in working patterns. Obviously, in the UK, the impact of Brexit has had an impact on availability of people, and we're going to just need to think in a very different way. So the way that we innovate has to change, in my opinion. I think we need to do much more collaboration, certainly within sectors, but also cross-sector, and really look to have a much more cross-functional approach to the way that we solve these problems. Because I don't think that the sort of global networks that we've relied on, we've shown how fragile they've been in during the COVID time. So, I think it's something we're going to have to find our way through, but I certainly think it's going to look different to how it's looked in maybe 5 years ago.
Okay, Steve?
I mean, it was a big change for us. We're a company that sticks big things together and cuts big things and whatever. So our big day job is making large platforms that float, fly, and are traditionally rumble or blow up, depending on which bit you're interested in. So we had to change quite a lot. The materials, what happened there, we slowed down on our research. We still built stuff, but the research was tricky. You can't get in a lab, you can't put on new products. So actually, if anything, my big fear was the slowing down of development, and critically for us, certifying new. The other big problem, which we didn't see coming, which was a real big one for us, was what we call SWEP, certificately qualified and employable people, massive skill shortage. We tried to recruit in 2020, 1,200. We tried to recruit 1,600 in 2021. We've got a target of 1,750 this year. We're still 1,000 down, engineers down, just engineers. And that's a company of 80,000 plus people. So that skill shortage is a problem. We also had to bring all these people in and train them differently. There's no point bringing a material scientist and saying, congratulations, you're a material scientist for BAE now. By the way, what's it look like in your kitchen? Because that's where most of them live. So we spent a fortune retraining and training our other people as well, being innovative about bringing the skills up online, working with our university partners. So actually, last year, we spent more money than ever in universities, but not necessarily on the same things. Not so much on R&T materials, it was the training of the next generation of material scientists, because there's a lot of old stages like myself. They've been in the company a long time and they're quietly working their way out of the company. So huge challenges in that space, particularly when suddenly Ukraine happens and surprisingly businesses picked up, I think it would be fair to say, in our sector. So we've got to bring things on, we've got to move things faster, put them in place faster, supply them to our customer who then supplies them elsewhere. So big changes, huge changes, and a new way of life, a new way of working, a way of life.
I mean, skills, I'd like to get some input from the audience. If I look from a university perspective, we've got PhD students, master's students who weren't able to get into a lab for 12, 18 months, 2 years. And, again, that's Manchester, but I think it's globally. So you've now got people with a PhD with an 18-month, 2-year gap in skills from working in labs. So for me, there's some real challenges that are now affecting some of our skilled population coming through, and I'm sure you guys working in industry want graduates who have got some basic skills for doing material science, material application. Tony?
Yeah, particularly on that one, James, are very important to us, those practical skills Laura and I were talking before, but also the ability to articulate that science and have a commercial understanding. Science on its own without that commercial savvy really has no value in the world. And You and I have talked, and we talked in the panel, about the speed of development now. If you haven't got that commercial savvy, you don't get the timeline that goes with the good science, and that's critical. And I think, for me, the big driver of that need for speed, something you said, Laura, globalization has come not to a grinding halt, but it has come to a halt, and security of materials, where we've sourced specialist materials freely from around the world, especially Ukraine, it isn't going to be there anymore. So we're going to have to adapt our well-structured formulations, and that's going to take some effort, but it's also going to take resources to be able to do it. But we will have to change. The material formulations will be forced to change. It's a need now rather than a desire.
Yeah, I think this whole change is a key question. Sustainability, I think you touched on there. We'll come back to sustainability. Is that an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, just following on what you guys were saying, the two issues that I see are really industry and then societal when it comes to innovation. So definitely a long-term structural shift has happened in terms of just labor and labor availability. So our time to locate, our time to close a new individual, bring them in, has gone drastically up for some roles in excess of a year. The cost to retain those people obviously has gone up pretty dramatically. I think what a lot of people don't talk about too is the cost to transition. So, to get somebody we recruit nationally, to pull them over into our market and get them fully set up is now a $70,000 to $90,000 extra expense that we may not have had before. The supply chain is definitely an issue. I look at the numbers day in, day out, so I'm more acutely aware of it. But obviously there are time delays to get materials from overseas. The cost is up substantially. But the amazing thing is the supply chain, the transport chain, is still astronomically high. Mm-hmm. So just to give you a sense, at the peak of the pandemic, we were paying $21,000 for a 40-foot container. Today, it's down at about $13,000. It used to be about $7,000 to get it to the port of New York from China. Amazingly, I don't know how it is in the UK, but here, we to move two 40-foot containers, just signed off on the PO for this, was $20,000 to move it 400 miles from the port of New York to Rochester, New York. Wow. But now switching over to the society side, the way that I look at it, where are the innovations required? It's anything with energy production and storage. Yep. It's going to be future cities, sensing, construction materials, and there are more of them, but and probably human health. But those are going to be big, long-term, structural, foundational things that I think materials are going to have to play a role in addressing those challenges, especially as we end up with some of these population pressures over the next 50 years.
I think the supply chain, I heard an interesting anecdote the other day. One of the large sports brands apparently has now leased or bought 4 747 jumbo jets to actually fly shoes from China around the world because they can't get hold of shipping containers. Yeah. So for me, what's that going to do for sustainability? But it's really starting to drive this whole supply chain sort of thing. So I'd like to come back to the skills debate a little bit. There's a few people touched on skills there. I mentioned we've got PhDs, masters coming out without some of those skills. How do the panel see skills? Are we facing a skills crisis? In STEM, quite broadly, I guess, not just materials, this whole science, technology, engineering, maths area. And if so, what can the industry do to tackle this? Steve, so maybe start with Steve.
We're definitely facing a skills crisis, as I mentioned, with 1,000 engineers down alone. And in different areas as well. The new areas for us are obviously the digital side of things is really coming in. That's a different skill set. I don't know what the guys think, but I'm finding that those are hard to nail down in. Boy, do they know their net value. We've got a couple of actually PhDs with you guys, actually, James, one of which is joining us, and the other one is holding out at the moment. He's trying to get 75K as a starting salary from us, which is going to be a challenge, I have to admit. And they know, but that is the market rate when you're fighting against those new high-end skills, because these guys are essential going forward. I don't know what you think. But for me, one thing that we could carry on doing during the pandemic, materials-wise, we did a hell of a lot of modelling. Mm-hmm. And that is not going to go away. That's going to increase.
Yeah.
So those digital skills, the digital twinning, etc. So the marketplace for those guys, there's going to be a serious fight. We're used to fighting over with the oil industry for welders, etc. Now we're fighting against the banking industry for guys with computing skills and digital skills, because that is the way of the future, even in materials. I really believe modelling and mathematical side of things is really going to transform our materials, where if we're going to do things quicker, faster, leaner and cheaper, it's got to be done with modelling, because the normal way we certify costs a fortune. So doing it modelling is the way. So those are the skills we're going to fight for. The other ones are still in short supply as well. I mean, literally, we spent more money in the university sector last year for the first time ever on L&D than we did on R&T in the UK, which has never happened before. And that was loads and loads of little contracts adding up to a big chunk of money compared to a big, James, make me a large graphene wing, etc.
Need to change that, Steve.
I can hear the ka-chinging already. But anyway, so that was a big transformation, and I tracked those changes on behalf of the company. And it was literally a spreadsheet going down to infinity with lots and lots of L&D. So big transformation. STEM, SWEP, big challenge for the next decade at least, I would argue.
Landon, maybe from the US?
Yeah, I mean, I see a massive structural problem in the US. I'm assuming it's similar in the EU. So we rely on, excuse me, PhDs, chemical engineers, so mostly chemists. And chemists, last year, we had only 13,600 graduates. And in the chemical engineering space, I believe it was 16,600. So down 6% year over year for about the last decade. And of course, with COVID, we had the roll off of a number of people that wanted to retire and just move on. And that is going to be a major challenge. I mean, nano is just a very, very small subsection of chemistry, and we just don't see the labor there to meet the demand today.
Okay, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's been said. I mean, engineers are still in massively short supply, and obviously for a business like Tata Steel, that's a real concern. But I also passionately believe in what Tony was talking about, in that we, the graduates that we need in industry have to have cross-functional skills. We just don't work in silos anymore. So an engineer needs to have the digital skills that Steve's talked about. They need to be able to communicate. They need to be able to work cross-functionally and think kind of bigger picture, especially when you start to talk about sustainability, which I know we'll go on to. So, I mean, it is a concern. I mean, I think, as a big company, and I'm sure BAE is the same, that we have strategic partnerships with universities, so we're in a privileged position that we can kind of tailor some of the university offerings to suit our needs. I guess for a smaller company, it's a bigger issue. But we find that we're having to move those offerings much more from, being a materials scientist or materials engineer to being a business person who understands materials. Yeah. And that's quite a shift. Yep. And it's a change in expectations of the graduates that come out as well. Because they're not going to be working in a lab 100% of the time looking down microscopes. That's not what life is.
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, it's an issue. I think sometimes we are masters of our own problem. We talk volumetrically about science and what it can achieve, and we don't inspire people. Perhaps we don't talk enough about the societal effects of the science that we do. And I'm finding, I'm old now, but the younger generation have a real passion, not just about net zero, but about societal issues. And perhaps we don't paint a big enough picture that the things that you're doing are not only making money for a corporation, but they're actually changing society. And that thing that youngsters rightly concerned about, will there be a planet Earth in the future? I think you've got to tie that into that pitch. I think the other one in there is nothing wrong with universities, but it can't be the only way, can it, forward? It's a big expense anywhere in the world. And I think youngsters just look at it and think, do I really want to saddle myself? Whether it's a loan or a graduate tax, it's still a big number that they see. And I think we've got to find ways to get people learning over life so that it isn't just a degree and then nothing else. Try and do that more bite-size and the finance more bite-size.
And apprenticeships as well, of course. I mean, that's a key model that I think is growing, certainly in my industry, that we we're doing more and more apprenticeships now rather than relying on graduates. I guess you've got a similar experience.
To higher degrees as well. I think that the problem is when we talk of apprentices, everybody thinks of the old type of apprentice, quick fits. It's not that at all. It's apprenticeships in everything, all skill sectors, and to a very, very high level. And the advantage they have, most of them live at home, they get paid full time. Mum does the cooking, mum does the cleaning, they're living the dream.
Sponsored through university.
Sponsored through university. It's a different model, but I said we tried to recruit 1,750 this year. 1,000 of those as apprentices, and we got huge activities around our Barrow site, around our Wharton site. Thousands of apprentices are going through the system because without them, there is no future.
Quick show of hands. How many people in the audience work in an organisation that employ apprentices? That's quite encouraging. So for me, sorry, I put my hand up, I'm sure. So for me, the apprentices I agree. Graduates, do people employ graduates? It's about an equal amount of graduates, apprentices. I mean, that for me is quite positive, and I know BAE and other companies are, for me, it's a good pipeline, type of activity. So let's just, for me, move a little bit. A few people mentioned net zero, this drive, UK. I'm sure you're familiar. I'm not sure what the US is, Landon, but UK 2050 has this ambition for net zero. Manchester has an ambition for net zero by 2038. So one of the challenges in my language is if we want to achieve some of the things by 2038, and we do things conventionally, we should have started probably 10 years ago. So if I look at advanced materials, then advanced materials can take many tens of years from discovery through to a place in the marketplace. Steve touched on modelling, digitization. I think, again, is that a way of speeding up some of the advanced materials into the market? So a question, I think, for the panel is how can companies tackle the twin drives towards sustainability and also digitization? And again, I'd link it a little bit into the skills agenda. So again, from my experience, to try and get graduates, students, particularly from diverse backgrounds, interested in science, from my experience, we're finding more female engineers, for example, who may be interested in a sustainable role than they might have been around oil and gas or defence or traditional engineering. So for me, how do they see sustainability and digitization? What role can you see that play with companies going forward? Laura?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we all talk about digitization as being an answer to sustainability, and it certainly plays a part, but we're also increasingly hearing about the carbon emissions of digitization and all these server farms and stuff and what they're doing to the planet. So I think it's not the silver bullet by any means, but I think Steve's already touched on it. You can definitely speed up materials development through modelling, through digital twins, through virtual factories, all of that stuff, which is not only improves your lead time, it also reduces your cost because you can be really sure of what it is you're developing before you commit to plant trials. And in the case of steel, the minimum you could make is 300 tons. So you want to be pretty happy that it's a product you want to make before you commit the resources to it. So that all certainly has a role to play in it. But I think there's lots of smaller things we can do as well around sustainability. Again, if I look at steel, we don't hide behind the fact that we are big polluters, and it's not all about big investments. It's about little nudges as well. It's about what can you do to change the way you heat something? Instead of use gas, let's use near infrared. It's about reducing waste in your supply chain. That's all about sustainability, and it's about securing those supply chains that we've already talked about. And localizing. I mean, and most of our customers now are asking us to localize and want to buy from local suppliers. So we all have to kind of move together, I think, because we are all connected in one way or another, particularly if you're a real materials supplier. In terms of the skills for that, again, it comes back to having these multifunctional individuals if they exist. Because if you need to think big picture to work in a big corporate, you need to think really big picture when you start thinking circular economy. Because you're not just thinking about your own business, you're thinking about everybody else's business in the supply chain as well. So that's a real skill set that I don't know how you teach it, to be honest. but we've got to try and think about, the system rather than just the individual industry's part in that system. It's going to be interesting.
I mean, systems, for me, this systems thinking, it's not just the skills, it's not just the digitization, the materials. Again, I think a challenge I'd put back to the university sector is how do we teach systems thinking into our graduates and students? Tony, do you want to?
Well, yeah, I agree, James, systems thinking, but sometimes non-systems. If you think about data scientists, and Stoke, where we operate, has a dream to be Silicon Stoke, and into the gaming area, well, what skill set do all those, what I might see as geeks behind screens have? It's data, it's handling data, not the sort of data that perhaps you and I might think about. But why can't we get them to think about data? It's just data. So let's not systemize it too much. Let's give some freedom in there. But there has to be a structure, doesn't there, from the work at this end to an output. So I think we do have to teach grads and postgrads about the outcomes rather than just the process itself. But I think we do want those broader thinking people. So I would just challenge a little bit, James, the systemization.
Steve?
Sorry, which bit? The sustainability of the system?
Sustainability and digitization. How do you see companies addressing that challenge, the drivers?
In stages, to be honest, because we, as you've already mentioned, we've got a sort of supply chain out as well, and the best way forward for that is the carrot approach, not the stick. So it's a carrot of collaboration, because we had a meeting last week. Kathy Davis, who again used to work for you, is head of sustainability, and we were sitting down and trying to work out what are the big problems, the ones that if we don't sort it now, there is no next stage. Now our core customer wants the same performance, but using an alternative. That's not trivial. So if we look at diesel, for example, if we had synthetic diesel, and I'm trying to put it on an aircraft carrier, for example, so as we can just do a swap. If you think your price of filling up your fuel tank when you came here was expensive, you wouldn't believe how much synthetic fuel costs would look like to fill an aircraft carrier. We'll probably bankrupt the country in one go. So we've got a real challenge, and we see going forward in the first 10 years, we can see ourselves having a system where we've got to use an array of fuels and turn on different ones, because we may not even be able to get them. People going about, what about hydrogen? And that might work well for the BPs, but actually, sadly, people fire large projectiles at the things that we put out on the sea, and therefore hydrogen not quite so attractive. Ammonia, actually quite good as well. Ammonia is rather toxic. You get a hole in your tank, you got, and then actually we pollute the sea as well. So we've got to think very, very differently as a system, and we're trying to look in stages of change, in intermediate stages, maybe even one thing that we do in peacetime and another thing we have to do in wartime, and then bringing that on gradually. So huge challenges just on that early stage. This is by 2032 we're talking about, way beyond the 2050, but also what I really want to say, what we were concentrating on last week, it's the whole life cycle.
Yeah.
Let's not bring on board something that's a disaster in 10 years' time. That's what we're thinking, because that's how we got ourselves in the problem we're in at the moment, to be perfectly frank and honest. So it's that bigger thinking, the whole system.
I would say, with materials development, you could probably go back 50, 60, 70 years. We're still doing the same thing. Everything's highly empirical, high cost labor, long periods of time. And that's not just on the material synthesis side, that's the material design side, the performance testing side. It just kind of never ends, right? So it takes 5, 7, 10 years to get something to market. And I tend to think that competition ultimately drives productivity if you want to be able to compete. And that's what we're really talking about, is productivity. And if we want to be able to compete against China, which, China is a strategic competitive threat, at least in the United States, the only way we're going to get there is to go with productivity. And just to give you a sense, if I took $1 million and I said, I'm going to spend $1 million a year on people, I might get 8 people for that $1 million. In China, for high value labor, I would get 25. Yeah. So you can throw more bodies to the empirical problem. We'll never be able to compete. Yeah. So the way that we have to operate is really first mover advantage, speed to market with something novel, and then this is an observation from my own business, is I think the days of just, hey, it's a commodity and everybody buys it is over. It's all about customization for the customer. And so where do I think that takes us in the context of at least nanomaterials? We got to get out of empirical. We got to get to, I would say, AI or machine learning aided synthetic design, being able to design materials in a program and then do simulated performance testing. And then when it comes time to actually make the materials, test the materials, outside of the pharmaceutical community, there is really not a lot of high throughput testing. And I think that's an area where the entire inorganic market, especially nanomaterial market, is going to have to move. Because I suspect what will happen over the next 20 years is you'll see the commodity nanomaterials market move over to China, and then we'll be left with kind of the specialty market.
I'm going to get a bit off piece because I think people are asking questions, but we can't see them. So I'd like to stay on sustainability. Oh, there's a question there. Sorry. Do you want to try the microphone?
Go on, throw the mic. Throw the mic.
So on sustainability, in the panel's opinion, do you think the government are doing enough other than setting a timeline to incentivize industry to be more sustainable? Or do you think they should be more accountable with more of a strategy rather than just saying we want to be sustainable by a date?
I think some of it is a foundational problem. So like if I think of things that we would have to do in the nanomaterials market to truly be sustainable, again, it's all about productivity. So something like, for example, being able to give materials engineers access to a database with materials, their performance, so that they can move speed to market, ways to deal with materials end of life. Industry does not take that kind of pre-competitive investment for the most part. And so the government really does have to step up in that area if they want to. I think another kind of foundational challenge, now this is probably just unique to nanomaterials, is specifically China and Russia have decided as a government, we are going to fund the Valley of Death for commercial operations. And so what you're seeing is liquidity, cash being pumped right into commercial operations, which gives them an economic leg up against the West. One individual company, Cerion, as big as we are, is not going to change that. I think that's something that government has to step up and really, nip in the butt. I'm not sure it'll change anything, but at least good old college try.
Tony?
Well, for me, it's a good question. I think the government can always do more, and I think some of those fundamentals, absolutely. But in my 15 years in this market, I've never seen so many CEOs absolutely committed to the change. I've had colleagues on my board in the past that told us to stop fiddling with some of the new technologies that were designed to reduce energy. And their view was, why don't you stop wasting your time on that and just put the prices up and get on with life? And that same organisation now, different leadership, is absolutely at the forefront of driving down its energy use in a good, holistic way. So I think having the target is important. It's got to be there. Someone's got to set a target for a nation and industry. It's whether industry leaders will really pick up the baton, or will they turn to marketeers and we'll have lots more greenwash? And that's the peril, I think, of nations in the future, marketeers.
Steve, I believe the MOD are even talking about going to sustainable armed forces. Any comment?
Well, they are, yes, most definitely are. They're big thing in Newport the other week, which you probably lurking in the background as well. It's a challenge. For me, they're doing some things, right? What they do need to do is be firm. So I'm going to go back in my old memory here. So in the 90s, I spent a lot of my time doing European projects looking at chromate replacement. Okay? And REACH was going to come in. And in 1997, we certified intermediate high solids chromate-based primer because we couldn't find an alternative at the time. And then the law changed for defence. So we're still using it to this day. So this time round, the government's going to do anything. It's got to have proper targets, stick to them, no exemption clauses, and we have to accept that there isn't always a silver bullet swap in, swap out. And we've got to do that for the greater good of everybody, which is why I mentioned the fuels. I can literally see a manifold in the next decade, where we got the same sort of engine, but you can inject it with hydrogen, ammonia, whatever available, and fuel cells maybe ramped up. We're going to have to bite the bullet. We're going to have to go with it. We're going to have to invest, and we're going to have to try it. And it may be that when our customers use the thing in anger, so to speak, they have to swap other bits out and then go back to old. But we've got to try it so that the large volume changes. So the government's doing stuff. Is it doing enough? Possibly not. It could probably help without a pandemic. That probably wasn't on their to-do list as well. So it needs to get over those things, but it's got to be firm with us because otherwise, as you can always, greenwashing, marketing, you can make lots of nice brochures that suggest one thing when reality is perhaps another. Laura? Totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I mean, I think we talked about it earlier, this ability to cross the valley of death is critical. I mean, to be fair, the UK government through the research councils are pumping tons of money into the low TRL research, particularly in the foundation industries like steel. So I really can't criticise that at all, but it's moving it then from TRL 1 to 3 into something that a company like Tata can use. Because the industry aren't going to take the risk. So I think, as Landon's already said, that's certainly an area that I think we could be better at as a UK PLC. I also agree with what you said about being firm, but my caveat to that would be that it has to be done in a way that doesn't make us uncompetitive.
Yes.
So if I think about, again, energy, obviously key issues for us. Energy costs at the moment, are the biggest threat to the foundation industries because it's bonkers, and we're not on a level playing field with even our European cousins, let alone the States. So legislation is good, and it forces us to do the right thing. I think we want to anyway because we're citizens of the world, right? And we're all humans at the end of the day. But if it's done in a way that makes us uncompetitive, then we're just going to go into a spiral. Where companies go out of business. So I think it has to be very balanced. I think it's difficult. There isn't a silver bullet to this, right? It's multifaceted, and I think there are different solutions for different industries. Ultimately, I think we all want to achieve the same goal, and that's a major step forward. Whereas maybe in the past, like you said, Tony, maybe not everyone was on the bus.
Yeah.
I mean, just for me to add to that, I think we need a mindset change.
Yeah.
I like a phrase, sustainability without compromise. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that with advanced materials is generally when we think of sustainability, there is a but. It costs more, it performs less, it's less good for your car. E10 fuel is a good example. The general perception, it's more ethanol, it costs more, it's less efficient, and it doesn't do your engine much good. So there's almost a but when you go environmental. My case study is a good example. Concrete. By adding a small amount of graphene, can we reduce the amount of concrete we use by up to 30%? So that would be a 2-3% global reduction in CO2. Lower cost, sorry, Laura, less need for steel reinforcement, but less material. But there's also companies I know here are looking at recycling plastic into graphene that you could add to your concrete. So if we can get this more circular economy that achieves this net zero, but actually gets some of the targets, then I think advanced materials. So legislation I think is important, but I think we've also got to have that commercial drive that shows that we're doing something that adds value, needs that subsidy. Again, careful with my language, Innovate UK do a great job, but they fund less than 10% of the proposals that go to them. I'm not sure the US. So there's a lot of schemes to invest in startups, spin-outs, innovation competitions. But 10% win rate is quite low. If you're dependent on winning a grant to take your business forward, it helps if you win, but it's quite difficult to win that bid.
Yeah, those grants in the United States will only take you so far. Probably the most common would be like a SBIR, which is $200,000 to really develop an early proof of concept, and up to $1 million to bring it to some stage of commercial maturity. You can't really do much with either of those. I mean, quite honestly, if you're trying to move a business forward. One of the observations I have, especially around sustainability, is yes, the free market where there is a draw is going to invest for sustainability. But materials is kind of the foundation for a lot of sustainability efforts, whether it's recycling or direct carbon air capture, things of that nature. And staggering statistic, which my research team recently brought up to me. So the entire venture capital and private equity market for early stage, growth stage companies is $643 billion worldwide. 0.9% actually went into companies that are developing the materials that are foundational to fixing those challenges. Truthfully, I don't see the private equity market shifting because you're signing up for probably a 7 to 10 year effort, whereas in other industries you can get reasonable returns over a 5, 7 year time horizon with much lower risk. And so, in some ways, and I'm really not a fan of the government being in the business of business, but I do think that they're going to have to get more comfortable with stepping up, taking some risks, which could collapse. That's just the reality of things. And the thing that I got a good chuckle out of the other day was the comparison of our climate change budget in the United States, which is $45 billion for this fiscal year. Elon Musk is buying Twitter for $44 billion. So it begs the question, how seriously are we really taking it? Because if you look at the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, what they're estimating, to get sustainable, energy neutral, carbon neutral by 2050, we need to be spending $4.5 trillion per year, unabated, between now and then. 44 billion, 45 billion, the value of Twitter does not get you home.
It's interesting. So any other questions, please? I want to have a go at throwing this dice next time. So anyone who's got a question, please raise their hand. I don't think the app's working. So we do have a question at the back.
Well, could you throw it that far?
Oh, gosh. We'll do it.
Wow, yeah.
Go on.
If you hold it to you, it should reset, and then you should hopefully...
Can you hear me
a
now?
bit to your...
Yep.
A bit closer.
A bit closer? Excellent.
A bit closer again, I think.
Okay.
There we are. I think
can
we can hear that, yeah.
So I think one of the main vibes that's come out talking about the different ESG elements, talking about education, as these themes all come together, that aligns with the levelling up agenda that's been spoken about. How's the panel see levelling up within their locality, within the way they do business, and what effect is that having on the way they do business?
Okay, so the question's around levelling up. For those who aren't familiar with levelling up is really a study that the UK have done, a look at the flow of investment from both private and government to the south of the UK relative to the north of the UK. So it's a little bit UK-eccentric, but I'll be interested in Landon's view as well, because I'm sure there's different regions of the US. So for me, how do we better allocate investments to different parts of a country like the UK or the US? Laura, any comment? Because I guess you're in different areas of the UK.
Yeah, well, of course, steel traditionally is in what we would have called deprived areas. I very much use inverted commas around that. So we're predominantly in Wales. We're also in the northeast and sort of the Corby and area like that, as well as the Midlands. So yeah, traditionally steel jobs are 30 to 40% better paid than the average for the area. So you could argue that we've kind of already done a bit of levelling up. But I think what you see is that obviously those areas have become over dependent on businesses like mine and others. And you walk around Port Talbot in South Wales and everybody has some kind of connection to Tata Steel, which is fine as long as that organisation is still there. So, but what I've seen happening, particularly in Wales, and the Welsh government are very much into this, is kind of looking at their foundation industry, so steel and Allocate, and building an economy around them. So just very locally to me, we're building a whole new business park all about decarbonisation, predominantly the steel industry, but everywhere. So bringing in skills from Swansea University and other local universities, and getting a real sort of tech hub based around decarbonisation, because that's what our skills are, but can be transferred to other industries that aren't just steel. And I think that's all been part of government funding through the Swansea Bay City deal. And I think that's an example of where you can kind of blend the old with the new. You've got the traditional industry, but kind of bolting on some newer technology and newer industries to support that, can really help the places in which we operate. So yeah, that would be my perspective on it.
Steve, any view?
Yeah, I mean, levelling up's happening. The government is trying different initiatives. So, like your good selves, we've got some sites that are less attractive than others, and we're a big player. So, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody here from Barrow, if there is anybody here. But it's not one of our most popular sites certainly from graduate point of view. But we've been levelling up there, so we have loads and loads of apprentices going through there. We set up big college activities, and we're working together with other teams. Same in the Northwest. Our core customer has gone up there. We're working together there. So that's happening. Recently, there was a meeting with the UKRI last week where the government's taking all the PhD structures from the different councils, pulling them into the centre. And part of that is a levelling up agenda. So they're going to be trying to, I mean, you can imagine there's a debate rather with that NACA excellence as well, because, sorry, I didn't use the word NACA maybe, but there we go. But will it impact on that? I don't know. Levelling up has to happen across the country, because otherwise you end up with strong pockets down. I mean, if you look at the population of England, is it a third of the country is around London? Clearly that's not terribly level. So we are there, look, big companies are there, and we're helping with that levelling up. More needs to be done. Let's be frank, it's early days. The government knows it's trying some things. Some of those are going to work. Some of them are going to be disaster, let's be frank. But, you know, they've got to try. But it will take time. And it needs the industries, not just us. It can't always be the big ones. You've got the smaller industries are essential, particularly with the utmost respect to ourselves. You tend to bring novelty and difference, whereas we're traditional, very traditional.
Good, Tony?
Well, I guess I can speak openly. We're in receipt of 18 million government Strength in Places Fund, which is a 42 million pound project. Catherine Hickey's my CEO in that project. They'll talk later on the Midlands Industrial Ceramics Group, and that is a classic Stoke-on-Trent ceramics, traditional ceramics, the potteries. It's been dying for 30 years on the traditional ceramics. Now we're driving at the centre of some of the most advanced engineering ceramics in the world. So it really is happening there. It's small relative, 40 million, but it's a great consortium. We've got Rolls-Royce in, we've got Vesuvius, we've got JCB, so we've got large corps, but also lots of SMEs. So that is a game changer, but it's one example. It's not enough, and it's certainly not big enough to be a game changer.
Landon, your view on, is there any similar issues in the US around different regions, areas where there's more spend, less spend?
Yeah, if I understand level up, what it really is reallocation of capital to different geographies to kind of pull them up from a depressed state. We do have that, but it's much less coordinated. It's an economic development zone. It has huge tax incentives for owners, but there's a huge catch, which is you have to hold your business for over 10 years to catch that tax advantage. So nobody really uses it. One of the things that I would note, because I'm just a big believer in general, like you can't fight macro trends. The macro trend is that people are moving towards cities. It's happening, it's going to keep happening. And so I often wonder to myself, do these economic development programs really make an impact over the long term? I'm not completely convinced. But if I was thinking about economic development, I'm actually very quite partial to the Chinese way of doing it, which is, if you go to Foshan, it's the furniture industry. 80% of the furniture industry is there. If you go to Hefei, it's going to be all about automotive. In an industry, well, in the United States, if you go to Silicon Valley, it's all about tech. I wouldn't mind seeing an emphasis where, materials development, materials process development, all the infrastructure was all in one home. Yeah. Let's concentrate our resources and pull a community up over 1, 2, 3 different specializations. I think where we make a mistake in the United States, especially with government investment, is we'll diffuse the investment across the entire nation. So there was investments made over 10 years around analytical equipment. They ended up diffusing certain specialties into certain areas. A company like Cerion in Rochester, New York isn't going to try and go use facilities in the Midwest. It just doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. So apologies, we had quite a lot of questions from the audience, which I've now got. So we're going to try this now. So for me, an interesting question here for the panel. how would you challenge yourself to innovate on a product or technology that is quite set and resilient in the industry? Ooh. So I think it's a little bit around the change, a little bit around some of the conversation around, for me, regulation standards. You know, I go back to my concrete example. Industry in concrete are pretty risk averse. You know, it's quite difficult to get them to change. You know, new standards, new regulation, new verification, performance. So again, anyone got any views around, you know, how do we challenge yourself, whether it's your corporation, whether your organization, to maybe result? Landon, maybe?
From my perspective, your innovation better be a sea change from what's out there right now. If it's an incremental innovation, making concrete, I don't know, 15% stronger, lighter, I don't think that really gets the job done. I mean, what did like Elon Musk do with Tesla? Okay, so it wasn't just the electric car. They made an electric car, so that's great, but they also layered on autopilot. It took their car, which would have probably been a no-name, and put them on the map as something truly unique, truly innovative, going to improve productivity. I think that's where you got to be thinking about innovation to disrupt very large industries. The other thing I would say is don't count on that industry being the one that buys your technology. Yeah. You better have a strategy to work around the incumbents because they're slow. They may be well-meaning at times, but new innovations are not their full-time focus. So any kind of path to kind of go around the system, use regulatory to your advantage via lobbying and other more like public affairs efforts might be another way to go about it. It's very industry specific, but at the basis, you better be 100% better than what's out there right now.
Tony?
Yeah, I'm only 21. Just age, trying to get the traditional ceramic industry to change. That's been a journey in there. So, taking on a battle and engaging them. And I think to your point, rather than just work with the traditional, it's finding a home for a new tech and proving it in somewhere else. And then there will be followers. So you've got to find those early adopters. I think the other one is in your organization. Every organization, I think both of you said it, is business as usual. Getting the executive team, all or part, to think differently and be part of that radical journey, because you've got a business, even an inventive one like yours, it's still got some business as usual, but you need a group of, I might call it a terrorist group in your business to keep on driving differently. So it's having that, I guess, confidence to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve?
I mean, the first thing you've got to do, you've got to have a great idea, which is what Landon hinted at, but then you've got to sit down and you've got to have a good business case, which goes back to your point, it's got to be revolutionary. And I mean a proper business case, not a nice, woofy, visionary thing, because the first thing you'll have to do in a big company is you've got to win over the FD, and they're renowned for deep pockets and short arms. So you've really got to have a solid business case that you can prove that you will change things in a realistic timeline. Know the market well, so don't just go out and spend a fortune on, no disrespect to consultants here, but go out and try and understand the market properly, not with just flashy PowerPoint, okay? And then drive it forward, but you need a champion. Yeah. Certainly at senior level. If you've no senior champion, you are always battling uphill against tide of rubbish coming down upon you. So, good idea is the start. Solid business case is key. Know the market, know the dangers in the market, and be realistic about them with a timeline and a champion. Without a champion, you are just putting your head above the parapet to have it well and truly shot off.
Anything to add? Go on.
Yeah, I guess I think there's two additional things to what my colleagues have said. I think you really got to intimately know your customer and what their problems are. And we're not just talking, the supplier-customer relationship, the partnerships that we all say we have. Really properly understand what your customers are trying to achieve and work out how you can help them. Not only does that force you to innovate, it also helps you lock in with your customer. So I think that's critical. I also think, and there's something that I'm challenging myself to do, is to learn from other industries. I mean, we're all, particularly in industries that have been around for hundreds of years, we're all kind of, well, this is the way we do it. This is the way we make steel, and we'll always make steel in that way. I don't know, maybe I can learn something from where we used to do stuff, Steve, you know? Maybe I can learn something from the glass industry or the cement industry. And I don't think we do enough of that cross-fertilization, because we're all, you know, we're all special and we all do other stuff in our own way. So I think that, from a personal point of view, is how I would challenge myself to say, well, go and learn some more stuff from other industries.
Can I chip one thing I forgot, which really comes back to your point with Tesla? Also, make sure your timing is right. Now, you led us when we were MOATV, fully autonomous land vehicle. It was just too early. And you ended up with something that nobody wanted because, you know, so we were crashing cars long before Tesla, you know, using autonomy. So you've got to get that bit right as well. Make sure you know when the market and the customer is ready for it. Because if you're too early, sometimes it's good being a fast follower. Sadly, we're not fast, but you know, but we are a follower. So those are key things. If you haven't got that timing right, you can have the best thing in the world. All you're going to do is set it up for somebody else to reap all the benefits you've brought in for them. Whereas when you've got Elon Musk, who is a bit of a specialist taste, isn't he? And it's certainly different. Let's put it that way. He does things differently, so you've got a shaker there. But in general, those simple models.
Okay, so next question. I like this one. I think I'm displaying these questions on the screen down there, so that's why you can't see anything. But
hang on, this one.
Oh, it's there.
Oh, it's there. Okay.
Hey.
So, how do you see the role of startups in an agile materials development, and how your organisations are designing a structure to work with entrepreneurs? For me, this is a great one. If I look at the Graphene as an example in Manchester, I think in the last 8 years we've developed 44 spin-outs or startups. So a startup is traditionally a spin-out is traditionally where a university, academic or something spins out some technology. A startup is where a student or entrepreneur has actually set up a business. So for me, this agility startups, interested in the panel's views around that. Laura?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is crucial, and we've talked already about, you know, needing people to take this sort of government funding research into something that an organisation can use, and I think that for me is a critical role for startups, is to kind of commercialise some of this new technology that's coming through. I think in terms of how we work with entrepreneurs, I kind of flip the question over a little, and it comes back to what I said previously about intimately knowing your customer. Come and tell me how you're going to solve my problem, right? Come and tell me what you're going to do to solve my problem. And then I'm really, really happy to spend as much time as I can with you to talk about it, because you're going to make my life easier. I think where entrepreneurs sometimes make a mistake is that it's like, oh, they've got the best products in the world, but unless it means something to your customer, it's absolutely worthless.
Okay. Any other comments?
I mean, the big challenge for us is talking to them, because they've got IP, they're worried. We're big companies. They're worried that we're going to steal it. Ironically, if they knew us well enough, they'd know we're so slow that they're safe. But and we, you know, we try and give them paperwork, you know, which to look at and sign so everybody's comfortable. And of course, it's our paperwork, so you know, it's the equivalent of a John le Carrier book before bedtime. You know, they read it and they're out in no time. So you know, those are challenges for us. Is how do we adapt to? But the startups are essential. Novelty, new ideas, fresh thinking. That's where it comes from. You're not going to get it from us because we'll happily grind it out of you within a 10-year life timeline. You know, it's just the way we roll. We've got things to make, things to do, but we're always looking to new these agiles. And in the materials area, this country is fantastic at new materials, as James mentioned. The challenge, though, for me, is how we then help those startups grow and be sustainable. And that is where the problem comes back to, you know, the customer, etc. But come with a way to work with us. You're going to have to work with us if you want to get it on a large defence platform. The bad news is you're going to have to work with the large defence primes. So think of a way that you can do that and be comfortable with us, because we will ask you horrible questions and we will bring big lawyers.
For me, one of the things you were saying before, timing. If ever there's an opportunity now for those small entrepreneurial spin-outs. When we were talking as a panel before we got here today, we talked about the bigger organisations, your desperate need for people, and the only way forward is collaborate. Well, who are you going to collaborate with? Not with other big organisations, with those agile, small organisations that are entrepreneurial, because they've got the people and the ideas that you need. So the timing is now, but you've got to do as Laura said, and bring a solution, not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, and I have this old saying, which I'm sure is not mine, and I lifted it from somebody, that in the lifespan of a company, 20% is invention, 80% is commercialization and monetization. And so I think the best way to make it work for startups is for larger companies to say, okay, you have a solution set, a material solution set that I'm looking for, and we can approach this in two ways. I can acquire you, and then I can put you in my commercialization machine, or I can get you partnered with a commercialization machine that's specific to your material, or I'll license it from you for my particular application. But most bigger companies are better at doing the scale up, doing the integration, going through the legal, the regulatory, and all the other hurdles, qualification trials, that you necessarily may not want to be a part of. I think that a lot of material companies make the mistake of wanting to see it all the way through to the end, do the scale up themselves, do the manufacturing themselves, wring out every nickel and penny that they can get. And I don't think that that's necessarily the greatest model. If you can invest $5 million and sell in 3 years, that's going to be a heck of a lot better than if you had to invest $50 million and you're kind of teetering on, am I going to be successful or not, and you sell 7 years from now. A very different story in terms of return for your investor.
Okay, so I have one more question from the app. There's a few questions about universities, which I won't cover now, but if the people want to catch us at the end, I'll try and answer those. The one final one from here is, in recent years, have the panel seen any developments in reuse, recycling of end-of-life materials in aim to a circular economy? And they actually give an example of the glass or steel industries. So maybe Laura, any comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, steels was the original circular economy. I mean, it's 100% recyclable. So I like to think we've been doing it for a while. I mean, we do capture pretty much, well, certainly most of the energy and that we use on site is recycled. And certainly steel, we either collect it from our customers, their steel scrap, and use it again, or obviously there's a whole scrap industry that feeds it. So recycle your tin cans, they will get reused. I think, though, that from an innovation point of view, I think what's really exciting is how we can start, certainly with steel and the capital intensity of it, how we can start solving some of the other recycling problems. So, for example, plastic is made of carbon, and we need quite a lot of carbon to reduce iron ore into iron. So there's a lot of work that we're doing at the moment to say, well, could you actually use plastic instead of coal to give you that carbon? Now, you've still got to deal with the emissions, right? So that's still an issue, but maybe we can be a recycling centre for some waste materials. And also the waste we produce. I mean, a lot of the aggregate that we produce from our liquid steel and iron processes are used for roads, they're used for rock wool, they're used for other products. So I think there's a great example, and steel's not unique, there are other industries like it, where the circular economy has kind of been in place for a while. I think the challenge for us as society, and going back to the government question, where government can help with the strength in places type approach, is how can you do more of that? How can you look at every single piece of waste that one industry is making and make it into a raw material for the next industry? And that would be a real circular economy.
And for me, there's a real, I'd love about graphene. Graphene is carbon. It's in methane, it's in coal, it's in graphite, it's in plastic, it's in tyres. If we can reuse, then there's a great opportunity.
Yeah, there's carbon everywhere that we can use.
Steve?
Oh, I thought you were going to go to Tony next. Okay.
Go on, Tony, go on.
Yeah.
No, I think yes, we've seen some. I think that one of the challenges all the time is the volume of material. If you're going to go to any of these organisations and say, here's a recycled and reused material, you're best have enough volume, because you're not going to have something in your steel plant when suddenly you've got 5 tons and you needed 50.
No, exactly.
The volume and the consistency. It doesn't have to be pure, but it has to be consistent. So that's one of the hurdles I've seen. The UK is very fragmented in its recycling of materials. If you just look at glass, every town, every village has got its own glass recycling centre that someone does in a dirty old garage or dirty old yard. It's not consolidated, and that's a big issue for us. I think it's solvable, but it does need an intervention. But that consistency of volume, I think, is key.
Landon?
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, we're still a young industry, so industry-wide, I don't know that there's as much focus on sustainability. I can speak not necessarily for our customers, because where the nanoparticle goes, end of life, somebody else's product. But on our end, over the last couple of years, I mean, obviously we capture any kind of waste stream. We'll recycle out, precious metals, rare earth metals, other things that might be in that waste stream. Solvent recovery has become a big thing for us now. Absolutely. Instead of, just putting it down the industrial sewer. And then we remediate all of our kind of water-based reactants. So by the time it's completed, it can go back to a river, and it's clean as when it came in.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so we got niche products. So we recycle most of our stuff anyway, because we can't just leave it somewhere for obvious reasons. Certainly the steels, the aluminium, etc. The carbon composites, we're trying to work out how we recycle that and use it again. But it's a bit like the paper industry. Recycled paper is not used, and cardboard is not used in the same applications as before. And we're in that same boat. We do all the cleanliness because we're lucky we have niche products which are expensive, so we can afford to put on the cleanliness aspects, because we're using a lot of interesting chemicals. So a lot of it is done, not so much, I will be honest, in glass. That's not one of our fortes, and we certainly don't do refractories very much, because Rolls-Royce deals with the hot end. We tend to do the cold end. But certainly all the other things, everything is looked to recycle, but more will have to be done. Let's be frank, more, everything. I was discussing with our sustainability team last week, what I'd really like us to be, BAE, is a bit like the Patagonia and people like that, the guys that do all the Peak Design, Cotopaxi, all those companies, blue sign appeal. So not just signing up to the government thing, but actually take a step to be really, everything is clean, everything is blue sign approved, good blue planet, etc., rather than just some things. And I think we were discussing it last week, whether it'll bite and take up with the executive. I don't know, because it's an expensive thing to do, but that is the way to go forward. Proper responsibility for everything you do and the impact it has on the planet. And I admire those companies greatly, because that's exactly what they do every time.
Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes before lunch. You're all getting ready for lunch. I just want to ask one final question for the panel for a quick answer. We talked about the challenges of the last 2 years, but where does the panel see the greatest needs coming from in the next 10 years? Landon, brief.
Yeah, I would go right back to what I had said earlier, which is, energy production, storage, smart cities, healthcare and biotechnology. I think the thing that I've been watching with a lot of interest is, how will this next economic cycle impact that pace of innovation, and is it going to slow it down? So, I mean, no big surprise to anybody here. We're in an environment where liquidity is literally being ripped out of the system. And eventually, I would expect sometime this quarter, we're going to see revisions to earnings with a lot of companies. In addition to the increasing interest rate that pulls company valuations down. When this happens, what happens? Usually your marketing, your R&D, or the first expense is to get pulled back. And if we look at innovation, broadly speaking, as productivity enhancing, and if we're slowing down that spend and we're doing it the same old way, how is that going to impact the next 30, 40, 50 years? So I think the companies that really double down and say, what, we're committed to innovation, we're going to charge forward. Yeah, it might hit our EBITDA, pre-tax profit, a little bit, but we know that 10 years from now that's going to pay dividends. Those are the companies that are going to succeed and not get left behind.
Okay, Tony?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that and just say I think the focus again, and we've said it, around energy. We know industry has to reduce massively its use of energy and give itself security of supply. I think that's where most of the money and effort will be spent.
Good, Steve?
For me, people in people. Because, I mean, all the other ones are important as well, clearly, but people with the right culture, so as you do the right thing, people with the right skills, so as they can do the right people. Young people are reevaluating what they do. We lost quite a few PhD students just because they halfway through they're locked. what was it? A professor we worked with in Birmingham described it as prison with Netflix, where the students were locked in their room, they had Netflix beamed in, and they had food parcels. They've reevaluated and they think, Christ, is that what I want to spend my life doing? So we've got to get the right people, we've got to encourage them, we've got to inspire them, we've got to bring them on, and we need them to come in with the right culture to change us and be innovative. Because otherwise, all those other things, nothing's going to happen. Yeah. So the people are the most important thing.
Finally, Laura?
All of those, the 3 S's, sustainability, security of supply, skills.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. And I'd like to thank the panel for a very insightful conversation. But a round of applause for the panel.